Welcome to the What It Takes podcast, where we talk to successful entrepreneurs, leaders, and CEOs across different industries. I'm your host, Darren, and in each episode, we're going to figure out how they got through difficult times, but most importantly, what it really takes to succeed. So whether you're just starting out your career or you're looking to level up your business game, my goal is to give you real insights and practical lessons from people who have achieved what you want. Hey everyone, welcome back to the What It Takes podcast. I'm your host, Darren, and today I'm welcomed by Ronak Vyas, who is the founder and CEO of MedcoShare. This is a pioneering medical co-working space company that allows private practice companies to operate quite flexibly without a long-term lease or high fit-out costs. Now, Ronak, you do have a background in commercial real estate, and you recognized that there was a gap in the medical industry, which led you to create a very good solution that benefits both doctors and patients. One of the things that really inspired me about your journey was your persistence and your perseverance, your problem solving, as well as your passion for healthcare innovation. So, Ronak, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today. I'm very excited to essentially just go through your whole journey and learn about your struggles, your wins, and what it is that you do today. So welcome and thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Darren.
So one of the things, Ronak, that I'm very curious to learn about is your early experience in entrepreneurship. So you were exposed to small businesses and entrepreneurship, which really sparked this innovation to drive and to innovate. So my question is, and I want to kind of go back to the beginning. What inspired you to want to become an entrepreneur in the first place? What was the background there?
Yeah, so I think I've always, had that desire ever since I was a kid to work for myself and to create. I just didn't know what it meant at that time. So even when I was young, I was reading magazines like Entrepreneur, and I would look up different business profiles and read profiles of different CEOs, and I've always enjoyed reading different startups, businesses, and the people behind them. It's always been a big passion of mine. And then I was exposed to having a family business. As a teenager, my parents bought a motel, and they grew to multiple properties. So that kind of desire was instilled in me, also from a family perspective, because that's something that I saw them doing. I didn't know that it was entrepreneurship at that time, right? But once I kind of knew what it meant and what it took, I've always really had a desire to start companies and grow them from scratch.
Yeah, and you started first off was it commercial real estate?
Yeah.
So,
So I started in commercial real estate brokerage, and I was representing basically owners of office buildings, land, warehouses, and then we would find buyers for them. Sometimes we represent the owners themselves, but did that for a few years, and then had a desire to open my own brokerage. And I noticed, being the middleman, you're making other people rich and
yeah,
kind of getting paid for it, which is okay. But I wanted to become the buyer, right? So
yeah.
I had a friend who wanted to do the same thing, just have a little bit of financial freedom through real estate. So we started buying apartment buildings together. First, it started with single family homes, and then we'd buy a duplex, and then, a triplex, and then just kind of scale up. And, it grew. But then I realized operations was not my thing. I love the acquisition part of it. I love the
Yeah.
disposition part of it. But
Yeah.
everything in the middle, it was not fun for me personally.
So you then switched from commercial real estate to starting different companies throughout your journey. Because if I remember correctly from my notes, in your journey to starting MedcoShare, you had quite a journey in starting businesses, didn't you?
Yeah, I had two other companies before. Definitely smaller, never took off. And actually, one I had to basically just shut altogether. It wasn't able to be sold. It just the timing wasn't right. Me as personally as the leader of that company was not a good fit either. So it was just so that I, definitely would say is a failure, but a lot of lessons learned.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second business is the brokerage side, which I opened my own brokerage, is still active today. But when the idea for MedcoShare came, I started thinking about, okay, what if I just start selling everything that we've bought, and just sort of have just sit on a little bit of cash where I would be able to do other things that I was more interested in. So
Yeah.
around the same time that I had the idea for medical co-working, I was also thinking of, okay, let me start selling these properties. So that was all great because every single property we sold, we made money, didn't lose money on
Mm-hmm.
any real estate deal. And then I'm still active on the broker side. So some money comes in from that as well.
Mm-hmm. And so talk to me a little bit about your journey. What was the shift from doing all of that and then starting MedcoShare? How did that happen?
Yeah. So, in brokerage, especially in commercial, all you're really doing is you're making rich people richer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, even though there's a financial incentive to kind of work in that industry, to me, I didn't really feel any personal connection to it. It really wasn't a passion. I enjoyed buying properties, but then I realized I didn't enjoy maintaining them. I didn't like the tenant issues, so things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you would only find something out once you try it, right? So
Yeah.
we scaled up really quickly, but then it just became a little too much. We also had a bad partner that we had to buy out, so it just became a little too complicated and not rewarding. So even if you have a business, you might not have aspects that you're happy with, right? Or that you like to do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I thought of, okay, let me do something where there's money to be made, but it's also, a good service for society. So I can get that sort of that personal satisfaction that I'm doing. I'm helping people, right? But obviously it has to make money because it has to self-sustain itself. If you are doing something that's helping people, but there's no money, there's only
Mm-hmm.
so long you can do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And so, because what happened was that you found this gap in the market where you were seeing that these doctors, they didn't want these long-term, very long-term leases. When setting up their private practices, the challenge for the doctors and the people opening up practice was they didn't know how much space they were going to need and for how long. And so you said, well, I'm just going to offer this short-term lease for practitioners, correct? That's really how and the story of how that happened was quite interesting.
Yeah, so I was representing doctors as a real estate broker, right?
Hmm.
And they would tell me, okay, I want to be in this area, but I don't know how much space I need,
Mm.
right? I don't know how long I want to be there. There's so many unknowns in the US healthcare system right now, not just with private practices, but there's just a lot of changes in healthcare. So it's really not as predictable as it was before.
Mm.
They would go in with a lot of hesitation into these leases.
Mm.
The other option is you have to buy the real estate. And if you
Mm.
live in if you live in a market like Philadelphia, which we're based out of, then it's not cheap to buy these office buildings. And sometimes there aren't any small buildings to buy. Some of the smaller buildings would be 25,000 square feet, which is way too big for a private practice.
Yeah.
Um, so they would kind of they would get into deals that they really didn't want to be. But from the
Uh,
landlord perspective, they didn't want to give you flexibility. They didn't
right.
want to do a small lease, right? There was basically both parties were at complete odds with each other. And then as a
Mm.
broker, you're just trying to get them to meet in the middle. But even
Mm.
meeting in the middle, most of the time it favored the landlords.
Mm.
So what we thought is if we can come up with a solution that the landlords would be happy with and also the doctors, then we have something. So the entire idea came from, there's a problem in the market and I want to provide a solution. So the
Mm.
solution to the landlord is, as MedcoShare, we'll sign a long-term lease. We'll sign out the amount of space that you want us to do, because typically they don't want to do small floor plans or spaces. They want to do larger spaces. So we'll rent out anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000. We're thinking of even going up to 10,000 at this point. And
Oh,
so we solve the problem with the landlord, right? Saying, okay,
yeah.
we're giving you what you want. Here's a deposit. It's a long-term 10-year lease, and just get it ready for us, and we'll take it. And then
Yeah.
from the doctor's perspective, all right, why don't we offer them flexibility where they can rent one room or multiple
Mm-hmm.
rooms? It can be month to month. So if they want to change a few months down the line, they can. If they want to upgrade or downgrade, they have that capability. So we essentially solve the problem on both sides. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason why we've been able to just be very attractive to doctors and also to the landlords.
That's amazing, man. And you started this, what year was this?
This was 2020. Yeah,
2020,
a
right
fun year for the
before
world.
the yeah, right before the pandemic, because you did face quite a few challenges with the business just launching right before the pandemic. So how did you navigate these difficulties posed by the COVID-19 pandemic when starting your business?
Yeah, so we signed the lease in January of 2020. And then
Mm,
in the US, everything really shut down in March.
mm,
So now we had this long-term lease that we just signed. We gave a $50,000 deposit and we're in the middle of fitting it out. And this pandemic hits where the landlord's like, okay, you can't work on it. I don't want anybody in my building. Everybody stay at home. And
oh my
so,
goodness.
yeah, so we're like, okay, well, can we postpone the rent payments? Like, what can we do to help like our situation? Because we're not bringing any money in if it's not
Mm,
able to be open. And there was a lot of like pandemic money floating around, but it wasn't for everyone. So for
mm,
example, as a landlord of a large office building, he didn't get a bailout. And so neither did we, because he's like, well, I got to pay my mortgage. So you need to pay me rent.
mm,
Right. So every single month for about a year, it's essentially like $10,000 going out every month,
oof.
right? And
Yeah,
no money
yeah,
coming in. I mean,
yeah.
I remember I would like just go to the space just to feel like someone is utilizing it, and I would walk, from one hallway, like into one hallway to the other, go in different rooms, work from the different rooms, just to feel like it's getting used, right? Because
Hmm.
it's just hard mentally for me to say,
Yeah.
we're just like burning $10,000 every month,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You just didn't want to leave it.
Just didn't want to leave it.
Yeah.
So we were really close to running out of money by
Mm,
January of 2021,
mm,
right? And I talked to my partners, and it's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to just call this as a loss and move on? Because everyone had full time jobs. I also kept my full time job throughout the entire year. So fortunately, that's what kept us afloat. Like we weren't, we didn't need this money to feed our families, right? We
mm.
didn't need that business just to take care of ourselves and our lifestyle. But, you know, mo- money bleeding every month is definitely tough to kind of deal with every single month. So they said, okay, let's just ride it out for a few more months. And I completely agreed. I'm like, we're already in this far. Let's just see
Hmm.
what happens, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing.
Mm.
In this situation, it became a really good thing because as soon as the COVID vaccine came out, there was a huge pent up demand from doctors and also patients.
Right. Yeah.
All the elective services were postponed, so people wanted to come back.
Ah.
They weren't traveling as much, so they wanted to do things like Botox or other things that would make them look good and feel good.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Doctors were furloughed as well. Like a lot of people don't realize this, but if you were not directly fighting the pandemic, you weren't really needed, right? So if you're a
Mm.
plastic surgeon, how much business are you going to have in 2020, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so a lot of doctors were furloughed from hospitals or from their practices, and they just got fed up with the entire system too. Like if they were working at a
Mm.
hospital, they may have been burned out. A lot of nurses were
Mm.
definitely burned out. Um,
Mm.
so as soon as they saw this opportunity, they're like, we can start, with a month to month membership. And so we just saw a huge uptick in demand. And that's when we were like, okay, I think we're onto something, but we don't really know until we open a second location. And
Yeah.
so we opened a second location in a different state, and that filled up even faster than the first location. So
Wow.
at that point, we were like, okay, we have proof of concept. We think this is something, we think this is a need that can benefit, a lot more doctors and also patients.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to one of the things you said during the COVID-19 pandemic, right, where you had your full-time job as a backup. Now, obviously, things would have probably been very different if you didn't have that job, right? But for someone starting out, wanting to be an entrepreneur, get into the real estate space, what advice would you give them in terms of starting something for themselves?
So I think there's a big myth in entrepreneurship that says just go all in,
Mm,
right? Like just give it your all, sacrifice everything. And I personally did that in my 20s. I gave
mm,
up my health, I gave up time with family and friends, I gave up every single dollar that I saved. I was willing to risk it all, and I did, you
mm,
know, and I lost everything. And I also lost that time
mm,
with, with friends, with family. So you kind of lose those years. The only good thing about being in your 20s and doing it is I didn't have a family at the time,
yeah.
right? So I wasn't affecting, children. I wasn't affecting a spouse. But me personally, my health definitely suffered after that.
Mm,
I would say like I've never really been in clinical depression, but I got
mm,
pretty close with that business,
mm,
right? Coming
yeah.
back and like just basically, going back to your parents' home and feeling just like a failure, and you just feel like a failure to, society at large. So what I'll tell entrepreneurs getting in is like it's better to start any business with a foundation. So
Mm,
that foundation can be, okay, I have this job on the side that's paying my bills, right?
mm,
Or I have this cash reserve that I'm not going to touch, and this will allow me to take care of, anyone I need to take care of, like including yourself.
mm,
Um, when you have a stronger foundation, it's actually you become a better business person because you're able
mm,
to take on more risks.
yeah.
So what happens is like when you're bleeding money and you don't have a foundation, you start taking on riskier bets, trying to recover, and then you dig
Mm,
yourself into a bigger hole,
mm,
right? So anybody
mm,
that has a foundation like that through your family or through your job, I would say really value that and don't put that at risk, right? And then start taking risks after you've already built that up. So even if it takes you a little bit longer to start the business, start
mm,
with a good foundation.
yeah. That's great, man. And you know, you were talking about how you felt like a failure when you had to move back to your parents' house and what am I contributing to society? How did you get through that? What kind of kept you going? What inside of you said, you know what, I can still do this. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to make something of myself. So what was it?
So a part of me doesn't feel like giving up,
Mm,
right? I just want to keep trying. And so a part of it was personality. The
mm,
other piece was I decided to go back to school. So I wanted to do my MBA, and
mm,
so I applied to Temple University Fox School of Business. I got in, moved to Philadelphia. At that same time, I met my wife, and so we
mm,
basically started a family. And then during like those college years, right, I met one of the co-founders for MedcoShare. So he was a doctor who was
mm,
trying to get trained in business, and we struck up a friendship in business school, and then we stayed in touch afterwards, right?
yeah,
And then he was actually the first person I went to when I had the idea for medical co-working spaces, and so that's how
amazing.
it all kind of started. But I think just having something else to do and staying busy
Mm,
is what's going to allow you to kind of just get over those bumps, right?
mm,
Um, Also, I would say like you don't need to like start right away. Like between that
mm,
time period to MedcoShare was about I want to say 9 years.
mm,
So during those 9 years, I was going to business school. I was working. I was in commercial real estate brokerage, right? So I was doing other things. I started my brokerage business. So I was busy and I was doing I was creating that foundation, but I really wasn't doing what I wanted to until we launched MedcoShare.
yeah,
And then even
yeah,
then, after all that time, the first year was completely horrendous and
yeah,
it almost went belly up, right? So you
yeah,
could do everything right and then be struck with some unknown variable that, really throws everything in for a loop.
yeah. And I kind of want to go into that because you said I didn't get to do what I wanted, right? And this is something that you mentioned in our introduction call where you discussed finding the right balance between passion and but also financial sustainability. So how did you end up finding that balance between passion and financial viability when deciding to pursue MedcoShare?
Yeah, so great question. And I think that's another myth of like entrepreneurship. It's like follow your passion, which
Mm,
essentially means do something that you enjoy so it doesn't feel like work, right? So that's
mm,
how it's kind of told to people. But the problem with that statement is that your passion might not lead to anything that's generating sustainable revenue. Like there might not be a market for your passion, right? Or it could be so competitive that even though you're passionate about it, maybe you don't have that level of talent or skill set to actually make a mark or to make money in that. So, it's actually a combination of like, you want to find something that you enjoy, but it also has to generate money and it has to be sustainable. So you have to find that balance. But then the third piece to it is, can you actually succeed doing that on a larger scale, right? So like you might not have that skill set, but you don't really know until you try. Or maybe if you like really take a deep dive into yourself, like, okay, you know what, I might not be the right person for this. So maybe I'll just keep it as a hobby and enjoy it and not try to make money off of it, right? So it has to be something that you could do. So even with MedcoShare, my real estate background really helps us out because I understand the language that landlords speak. I understand that industry. I understand how the financing works. I understand, how they kind of evaluate deals. So when I'm doing deals for MedcoShare for our spaces, I come from that background. So I felt like my skill set was there to take advantage. And now with the pandemic, a lot of people started working from home. So now these office buildings are sitting empty in a lot of major markets in the U.S. So we're able to negotiate a lot better deals than we were prior to the pandemic, right? Yeah. So that was like the silver lining. But I would say like it's a balance of all three things, and you might not realize that until you actually start doing it. But don't just follow your passion. I think that's horrible advice.
Yeah, I agree with that actually. I mean, I came across this graphic not too long ago that said, and it's these three circles. I can't remember the exact word for it, but you have these three circles: things that I'm good at, things that I enjoy doing, and things that people would pay me to do. And the three circles sort of in the middle there, you have the thing that you should be doing, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what you were saying. You should enjoy doing it. And you mentioned skills. You have the skills to negotiate these deals, and people are willing to pay you for it, right? So it's a combination of those things. And so now MedcoShare, you mentioned your expansion. So talk a little bit more about the expansion. So you start off with one, you open up another location.
Yep.
So you have how many do you have now?
So we have 4. So we
four.
started in
Wow.
Philadelphia. Yeah, and then we went to New Jersey, Marlton, New Jersey, and then we opened in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and then our 4th is in Pearland, Texas. So
amazing.
Going back to your expansion, I've said from day one I want to be a national company. I want to be the largest medical co-working company, both in terms of the number of locations, but also in terms of the number of providers that are practicing, in those locations. So right now we have 60 different practices amongst the 4 locations. And our goal is to go nationwide, right? Yeah. I'd love to just be in all these major cities, and there's so many great suburban markets right outside those cities, and just add more services. So start with the real estate, but then offer like marketing and staffing and other services to the docs. So if somebody wants to start a private practice, they can just come to MedcoShare, and it's a one-stop solution. They don't need to shop around and try to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Like we'll solve the puzzle for you. All you need to do is see patients.
Yeah. And becoming nationwide, how do you plan on doing that? How do you get there essentially?
Yes, really good question. So the one way of doing it is, organically, right? So you're just reinvesting the money you're making from the business, and then you just keep opening 1 or 2 at a time. And that is, that has its advantages. So you don't need to raise outside money. You don't need to dilute your equity stake in the company. So there's a lot of advantages to that. But one of the biggest disadvantages is that to grow organically, it's a lot slower than raising money and then growing that way. So it just depends on, like how you want to get there. And then for me personally, like I feel like this is a big problem. This could be a really big market. And so I want to grow faster. And so to do that, you have to fundraise. And so we've just been doing, crowdfunding, fundraising rounds on that. And I think that's going to be a faster way to grow. But then once you have the money, you have to basically be able to, start generating revenue quickly and start getting a return for the investors. So you don't have as much time to kind of make an impact, right?
Yeah.
As you do if you were just, going at it without funding.
Yeah. So the plan then is to get funding, buy more properties, and then so marketing has obviously been quite important for your business. When you do acquire these new businesses, how do you go about the marketing? How do you attract the actual clients into the co-working spaces?
Yeah. So just to clarify, we're not actually buying the properties. We're just leasing it from the
For
landlord.
renting, sorry. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that actually allows
Right.
us to go into more locations because it's less capital to get started. But the
hmm
marketing question is a really good question. I feel like if any business can figure out the marketing piece, right, the faster you can figure that out and the cheaper you can kind of acquire customers for, those
hmm
are the businesses that can be scalable, right? So like
mm
if you have a marketing plan where, the customer acquisition cost is $1,000,
mm
but they only generate $500 in revenue, you're
mm
going to be out of business pretty quickly,
Yeah.
right? So I can go on Google and just start paying for all these, ad campaigns. I can go on Facebook and do all that thing, and I can generate interest pretty quickly. But the cost to acquire would get so high that it just
Yeah.
wouldn't be feasible. So
Yeah.
then, so we tried to do that, and we realized, okay, this is not going to work out in the long run. So the paid advertising had very minimal impact. So
mm
we thought, okay, what's organic ways that we can market?
mm
Word of mouth is absolutely great. So we
hmm
promote word of mouth marketing. So if you have a doctor that's really like a fan of the space and and enjoys working out of there, he's going to tell or she's going to tell other docs that they know, and that allows just a little bit of like a snowball effect. Like the more they
mm
tell, the more interest we're going to get. And
Yes.
fortunately, a lot of the clients now in the Philadelphia region, we're just getting from word of mouth. They call us, and we don't have to do any advertising at all.
mm
Um,
mm
but we've been in this kind of in this region for about 4 years now.
Yeah.
Texas, it's a different story because we just opened there. So in
Okay.
Texas, we're trying to reach out to the community, join the Chamber of Commerce out there, just networking amongst different practices in the area, and it's a lot of work, and it's not really scalable because there's a lot of just kind of hours that you have to put into it, and just can't pay for that. You have to spend the time.
mm
But the benefit for that is you get better leads, right? It becomes a
mm
more sustainable business.
Yes.
So I would say, just kind of grinding it out that way with
Uh-huh.
either word of mouth marketing or for us doing just a cold outreach. That's been, I would say, our number one and two ways of getting clients. Number three is partnering with landlords, right? Because they want you to
mm
succeed, right? They rented you the space and they might get leads all the time that they can't do anything with. So we tell them,
Yes.
can you send us, any lead that you can't convert because their requirement is too small, please send them our way. So
mm
that's been another way we've been getting members as well.
I mean, word of mouth is very effective, right? And uh, it becomes really effective when you are able to give that value to the client. And so, for your business, what are some things that your clients appreciate or value? How do you make them want to talk about your business and share what you do?
Yeah. So essentially, we're in the service industry, right?
hmm
So for that, it's all about the experience
mm
and the relationship.
mm
So, when I go to the office, I don't treat it like I'm the CEO or anything like that. I treat it like, okay, I'm here to help you, whatever you need,
mm
whatever the space needs to be a good experience for the patients as well. I will do, right?
mm
So,
mm
if there's trash on the lobby in the waiting room, I'm not going to wait for the cleaning crew to come in, right? Or if there's a
Yeah.
spill, I'm just going to take care of it myself.
Yeah.
If I need to stay longer,
mm
I'll do that. If I need to come in earlier, I'll do that. So it's really about developing a strong relationship, but
mm
also giving a great experience to not only the
mm
doctor, but to the patients themselves,
Mm.
right? Because the patients are essentially the quote unquote customers for the doctors. So
Yes.
even though we're B2B, we also got to think about the B2C space, which
Yes.
is they need to be in a space that's going to be attractive to patients.
Yes.
So, we offer snacks, we have a coffee machine, things like you normally don't see when you go to a doctor's office, right? You go there and it's very like,
Sounds like a
like,
nice space. Yeah.
exactly. Come, I know you're in Norway, but come visit anytime.
Yeah.
Uh, so, it's just a more of an elevated experience for everyone involved.
Yeah. And do you get any benefits with when you have these good relationships with your clients, B2B wise?
I do. I'm actually spoiled by the doctors in the space, and I can't I can't believe I've gone through life without these knowing more doctors because I have an ENT group that I go to, and they're always like, oh, don't worry about this bill, or pay when you want to, and I never have to wait. I'll text, say, hey, can I get in? And they're like, yeah, come on back. We'll let you
Yeah.
know when the room opens up. So it's like I don't have that typical you know way that patients make appointments and all of that. So, I mean, I think that's been a great feeling. And I've been utilizing, I would say like half the providers in the space just because I'm curious, right? And I'm in my 40s too. So like some of these problems that they kind of address, like I feel like, oh, is this something I need to be concerned with? I never thought about any of this in
Mm.
my 20s.
Yeah.
But in your 40s, you start thinking about all these different things that could go wrong, right? And you start
Yeah.
seeing family and friends with healthcare problems. So then you go into a deep dive of like, okay, let me go see this person and let me go see this person. And, I'm much more proactive about my healthcare now
Uh-huh.
than I was like back, when I was younger.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you did mention that when you were younger, you didn't also have that focus on your health, right? Because you were so focused on building businesses and being an entrepreneur. So when you were younger, though, like I want to go a little bit back though to when you were young, starting out, and going through those rough patches. And I think is one thing that I found really inspiring about your story was this perseverance, right? Where you kept going. You mentioned that it was your personality, a lot of it at least. But I think, for someone young, because I actually spoke to someone who had seen an episode of the first podcast that I dropped recently, and he was so excited. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm in real estate. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm upcoming." And in my own personal network, there were also a lot of other young people who want to become, they want to become rich, quote unquote, right? They want to have that freedom. They want to go out. What would you say when it comes to then these young people that really want to succeed in terms of finding this, I guess, accepting that it might take longer than being okay with the fact that it might take a little longer than they expect, right? Because you really made it now and you're 42, right? But
So I don't think I've made it. I think I still have a long way to go, but I would say like in terms of perseverance, you have to have that. To me, I felt like you're only a failure if you give up,
mhm,
right? So if I stopped after my first business was a failure and I never did another business ever again, I would feel like a failure for the rest of my life because I'm not
mm,
doing what I want to do. So even if I had a
mm,
great job and, you know, even if I had all that, I wouldn't view myself as a success.
mm,
So you have to be comfortable in your own kind of skin and you got to know what you want and you got to be okay with losing because not everything is going to be a win, right?
mm,
And a lot of times is like these wins happen not on your timeline.
mm,
It take 10 years. So you have to have that patience, that perseverance to
mm,
get you through all of that. Um,
mm,
and some things, and we talked about this when on the intro call. When I was 40, right,
mm,
I invested everything I had into real estate, and
mm,
then there was a few people that stopped paying rents, and now we have some evictions. So now the money
mm.
that's coming in, or that was coming in, isn't coming in so much. So
Yeah,
even though I own the assets, they're not generating revenue. They're
yeah,
not generating profit.
yeah.
So I looked at my bank account, and this is the main checking account I'm using, and it's less than $1,000. And I'm
Mm,
like, what am I doing? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I have all these assets on paper, but I have
Mm,
no cash,
mm,
I'm basically cash poor. And so at that point, I also realized like you could have all these things and still not be wealthy because a
mm,
part of it is not just money, right? Like, there's a big part that's money, but the other part is the mindset. So when you're looking at that and you're like, okay, I really need to rethink things, but also not having that stability,
mm,
right? To say, okay, like these apartment buildings mean nothing if I'm not stable or
mm,
if I'm not mentally well, right?
mm.
If I'm constantly stressed about this, to me, that's not wealth. You know,
Yeah,
wealth to me is like, are you able to do what you want when you want to,
yeah.
right? So, at the age of 40, again, I felt like a failure. And this was after I already came up with the idea of MedcoShare, but we didn't really launch yet. I have a business degree, I have properties, I have a house, I have a nice car. I had all of that. And
Mm,
still I felt like a complete failure.
mm,
So I had to rethink everything and really think about what do I want, right?
mm,
And what I wanted at that time was a stronger foundation. I wanted a business that's growing. I didn't want to be in real estate anymore. Like even though I loved, owning properties and stuff and buying them, I just didn't want to. And that's when I had the idea, it's time to get out and sell everything and really pursue what I want to do. And at that time, I didn't know whether MedcoShare was going to, do well or not. It was a complete risk. There was very few
mm,
companies doing it.
mm,
But one of
mm,
the things like that I knew is if I didn't do it, I was going to
mm.
regret it, and
Yeah,
I don't want to
yeah.
live. I didn't want to live with that regret on my deathbed, right? So most people, when they're
Mm,
dying, they regret things that they didn't do, right?
mm,
And so I felt like I'm going to take another risk. I'm going to take another chance. I'm in my 40s. I'm not as energetic as I used to be, but I still have that sort of desire, and I'm still willing to take a shot,
yeah.
right? And so if you can do that, and you have that sort of mindset, I feel like it doesn't matter how many bumps and turns a roller coaster has. You're in for the ride, right?
Mm,
You're strapped in, you're locked in, you're ready to go. Like the ride
mm,
is going and you're there for it. Because a lot of people, they just want stability, right? They don't want all these twists and turns.
mm,
But any entrepreneur, I would say, get ready for a life on a roller coaster and
mm.
don't, emotionally, don't get so high when things are good and don't get so low when things are bad, right? Just try to
Mm,
be even the whole time.
mm. But in terms of developing that mindset, right, I guess, because I think that's the challenge, right? A lot of these young people go into this and they just don't have that mindset. Is there any way to develop that mindset, or is it something that you're just born with, or you have it from a young age? If you're in your early 20s, can you develop it?
I think you can develop it. And I think one of the best ways of doing it is just by jumping in and pursuing something, right?
Mm. So just
Go
taking that
through,
first step.
take that first step. You don't need to
Yeah.
know all the steps after that. Take the first step and see what happens,
Mm.
right? See who you really are, because some people, they might have a little bit of success and be perfectly happy with that, and that's great, and then they stop, right?
Mm. Mm.
Some people, I know people in real estate that have 4,000 units and they want to buy more.
Yeah.
I know people in real estate that have 10 units and they're happy.
Mm.
They don't want any. So you have to kind of know your personality, but you only know that once you sort of get in and start doing it and you take that first step. So that
Yeah.
first step is critical. And then just keep analyzing, like after that, okay, like,
Mm.
are you willing to take that next risk to, for step two and step three and step four?
Mm.
Maybe you're not. Maybe you like that stability. Maybe you like the W-2 job. Like there's nothing wrong with it. It's just like you're not really going to know until you try it.
Mm. Mm. And then, also in terms of passion, right? Because this is something that you've mentioned you love doing. Um, did you know what your passion was from a young age? Did MedcoShare come because deep down you had this feeling that, where did that passion come from?
Yeah. So, I mean, as a kid, I was clueless. I thought my passion was to play professional basketball. Like I was completely, I would not advise that on
That's
anyone.
funny.
Don't
Yeah,
follow your passion that you had,
yeah,
as a kid. But there are things that you might gravitate towards as a child, right?
yeah.
And I always gravitated towards real estate was one. And for some reason, I always loved the medical field. I didn't pursue it, but I did read like different books. I was always interested in that topic, in that industry in general. On TV, I would always watch, the medical shows. So even though I had nothing to do with it professionally, I still like enjoyed it, right? And so that was there. I just didn't know that was there, and that's what I should pursue. That's something I found out much later in adulthood, because as you grow, like your interests change, circumstances might change. Like there could be so many different things that happen, but there are little hints of like, as a child, of like what you gravitate towards.
Yes, yes. Because I was going to say, like you mentioned you like this thing. You used to do that. You used to watch these TV shows, read books in this. That's a very strong predictor in terms of like, yeah, maybe I'm gravitating more towards this field. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you know, going through everything that you did, right? So you had these two businesses. You had a couple of trial and errors throughout your journey. How did that help you better prepare for now starting MedcoShare? What lessons did you learn from the past that became valuable when you launched this business?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest lessons I learned is I didn't want to do this alone. I wanted to have partners, going into MedcoShare right from the very beginning. I wasn't too concerned about like, let me keep 100% of the company or let me take 50%. Like to me, it was more about who are the right people to take this pretty far, right? So there's a saying in business, like if you want to go fast, go alone, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to go far, go as a team.
Yes.
And I really wasn't worried about how fast we were going to go. I was more worried about just being able to get there and to do everything that I envisioned. I had the vision in my mind of being national and offering all these things even before we signed the first lease, right? But you got to start with step one. And so like, I knew like, okay, we're going to have to fundraise because we're going to need capital to be able to open a little bit faster. I wanted a doctor basically on the co-founding team because I needed that kind of clinical perspective as well. And then also the credibility, like when you're talking to doctors, and they're talking to another doctor, that's like a different relationship than me talking to them, right? So like that also helped. And then we have two other great guys on the team, and they come from a project management background. One was my co-founder for the other business, so I knew how he worked and things like that. So we started with the four of us, and to me, that was like the biggest lesson I learned, is that know what went wrong with all those kind of trial and errors, and then don't make that same mistake.
Yeah.
Right? Like really figure out what you did wrong, what your weaknesses are. You can't sugarcoat it. You can't blame other people. You can't blame the environment. You can't blame, the economy. You blame yourself for everything that went wrong, right? And to figure out how to not make that same mistake.
Take responsibility.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's, life is better that way, right? Because at the end of the day, you're not bitter. You're not blaming other people. Like if you feel like you're the only person to blame when things are bad, or also like when something is successful, like you had a part of that, you're giving the power back to yourself to be able to control your own emotions. Right? You're not mad at anyone else. You're not blaming someone else for the rest of your life. Like we had a bad partner in those real estate deals I was talking about. And it's easy to say, okay, he's the villain in this story, right? He's the one that screwed everything up. But, when you're going through that lawsuit, of course, you're going to feel that way. But not, after it's over, it's like, okay, move on.
Yeah.
That happened. Maybe you could have done something better. Maybe not. But either way, you got to move on.
That's a great lesson right there. And I think that's going to be so valuable to a lot of people, because when it comes to blaming others or external factors, it's so easy, right? It's saying, oh yeah, that didn't work out because of this or that, or it's not me. And when you do that, you don't actually learn as much because you don't reflect too much on it, right? It's just, oh, outsource my thought process to that external problem. Nothing was within. I think if you want to grow, you definitely have to be able to do that or have that ability.
Yeah, and success is a bad teacher,
Mm.
right? So oftentimes, if you ask people like, "Oh, why are you successful?" They don't know. They don't really know why. They'll give you reasons why, but
Yes.
that
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
not be the actual reasons,
Yes.
right? I think what's a bigger teacher in life is when you fail,
Mm.
right? Dating is a perfect example, right? Like I failed completely all throughout my 20s, right? And arguably my wife will say I'm failing now, but I think like I think the lesson is that, you know, just because like you failed at dating, and same thing with if you failed at business, it doesn't mean you just give up,
Mm.
right? Like if you
Mm.
give up after a few bad dates or a few bad relationships, you would never get married. You would not have, children. Like you would not have all these great experiences.
Mm.
So you got to keep trying. And same thing with business. Like, okay, you failed. It's not her or it's not the business. It's you. What did you do
Mm.
wrong? Right. And don't do
Mm.
that in the next relationship or business. I mean, it's as simple as that. So like, if you want to continue like being more like successful and just being able to like do what you want to do, you really got to give the power back to yourself and take accountability for everything. Just,
Mm.
I never play the blame game.
Mhm, mhm. I think it's just so important today. More people now than ever are blaming it on external things. In terms of success, though, so one thing that I see a lot today, and I'm younger generation in my 20s, there's a huge emphasis on habits, right? Making sure that you wake up same time every day. They're talking about cold showers, meditation, exercise, read all these books, right? This long list of things that they say are important and required if you want to achieve success. Do you believe that is the case, or can you achieve that without doing that?
Every person is different and every
Mm-hmm.
person's success story is different.
Mm.
You have people that are workaholics and they're just horrible to everyone else, but they're millionaires, right?
Mm.
You could have people that are alcoholics that are doing well. You could have
Mm.
somebody that never drinks at all, meditates every day, reads a book, but they become failures, right?
Mm.
So there's no correlation between, kind of like there's no set blueprint of what it's going to take for you specifically to succeed.
Mm.
So what's better is to find out what works for you,
Mm.
right? So like if you know that, hey, I do better when I don't go out the night before and I get a good night sleep and I have a nice breakfast and a nice cup of coffee in the morning, and so I'm really productive that day, then keep doing that,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Or if you feel like, hey, I'm more productive when I have a good time, like I need to go, vent and let loose, and then after that I feel like, wow, like let me work now because that was such a great time.
Yeah.
For me, like my thing is I love traveling.
Yeah.
So whenever I feel like, okay, I'm getting too stressed or I'm stuck or like mentally I just don't feel great, I don't really like drinking. I was never into that. I don't smoke. Both my wife and I, we both love to travel, and we take
Uh-huh.
4 to 5 trips a year. She's extremely
Amazing.
hardworking,
Yeah.
and I'm basically just copying her work ethic. And so, when we need to like just unwind and have relaxation, we book a trip, whether it's a weekend trip or international trip or whatever it is. That's what we do.
Yeah. Sounds like you found a great match.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like working together and then going on these trips. Okay, so to deload, it's mainly trips that you do. And then in terms of, habits, is there anything specifically that you do? Like what does a day in your life look like?
So every day is a little bit different because of like, different locations I got to go to or just travel schedules. But I'll say some things that are the same is I like to go to bed early. I
Mm.
like to wake up early. And I'm one of those that I can't be rushed in the morning. I
Mm.
need to like take my time. Like I'm the guy that's thinking in the shower, right?
Yeah.
I'm the guy that's meditating while having a cup of coffee at the same time. For me, that allows me to get through the stresses of the day because I know like as soon as I
Mm.
log in, it's going to be nonstop emails, phone calls, meetings, and it might not end until that, the evening.
Yes.
So I have to be like physically and mentally prepared. So my mornings are a little bit, kind of slow. I don't rush. Typically I don't eat breakfast. So it's
Mm,
just like a coffee and something small. And then I don't like taking breaks. So like once I start, I'll just go the whole day with working. And sometimes I won't even have lunch. But then
mm,
after I'm done, I feel like, okay, I really need to unwind. I need to have a
mm,
nice dinner. I need to talk to my kids. I need to watch some TV. So I can't work 12 to 14 hours every single day. Like I just won't be productive. Like it's going to be diminishing returns, after a certain point. So I
mm.
feel like my thing is more of like the slow and steady, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Put in 8 to 10 hours a day, but make sure they're really productive with
Yes.
minimal distractions,
Uh-huh.
and then go home and just turn your mind off to sort of business and like do other things so you can get ready for it all over again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I typically work 5 to 6 days a week. Like I don't think like, okay, just because it's the weekend, like, okay, you don't need to work. If there's
Mm.
somebody that calls me or some emails I need to get to, I'll just go ahead and do it. I think that's, a lesson I learned from just being in businesses pretty much my whole life is like, there's no set time. There's no 9 to 5.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have to be a little bit flexible. And then I hate like when people say, oh, it's Monday, like, oh, it's can't wait for Friday. To
Yeah. And
me,
I relate to that.
yeah, yeah. To me, every day is the same, right?
Yeah.
Because like just think about the mindset. Like you go in on a Monday morning and you don't feel like working. And then you
Yeah.
don't really get productive until maybe Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. And then you're already on Thursday, you're already thinking about Friday.
Mm.
Like, what do you hope to achieve if like you're only looking forward to, to other things? Like it's
Yes.
to me, that's a useless way of thinking, because it's a very like, it's a mentality where you're gonna really limit yourself.
Mm.
So every day, if you wake up like, I have a goal, I'm going to go after my goal. I'm going to go after my dreams. I don't care if it's Monday, if it's Friday. I don't care if it's raining. I don't care if there's a snowstorm. Like the weather, the day, the time, it should not impact the goals you want to achieve. If
Mm.
that's your goal, go after it,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Everything else is not important.
Yeah. Yeah. Reminds me a little bit of that stoicism, that stoic mindset, right? Where you're
Yeah.
just like, you know what, nothing is going to affect me. I'm going to go for it. Doesn't matter. Monday, Tuesday, Saturday, Sunday, it just doesn't matter. And you mentioned as well, like in terms of your hours, where, you know, for you, it's more important to have those 8 to 10 hours, very productive, very effective, because if you do 12 to 14, you're gonna hit the wall at some point. And was that trial and error? Did you figure that over time? Did you used to work more hours, or
It
what was that like?
was. It was. So in my first business, I didn't have family at the time. I really gave up a lot.
Hmm.
And it was nothing but work. I would enjoy maybe one evening out of that whole week, right?
Hmm.
Maybe just a few hours of enjoying, but it was constantly working.
Yeah.
From the moment, like from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, I was working on the business.
Yeah.
And that's the business that became a complete failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I don't want to say don't equate time to success.
Hmm.
It just doesn't work like that,
Hmm.
right? There's so many other factors at play.
Hmm.
Same thing if you go to a gym and you're in the gym for 12 hours. Does that mean, a month from now you're going to be stronger?
Hmm.
Probably not. You're going to
Hmm.
probably be sore for a week and not wanting to go to the gym, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's better to be more like stable and consistent. So you
Hmm.
see those gains over time,
Hmm.
right? And that's what I feel like about business. Like as long as we're consistent, as long as we're doing everything to stay profitable, right?
Hmm.
Then those are the things that I would rather focus on. I'm not going to go and just go on like a 3 night, bender where I don't go to sleep and I'm just doing work, work, work. It's
Hmm.
just not going to happen.
I got one final question before we wrap it up, Ronak. So, what does it take to succeed?
I mean, that's a really great question. There's so many different things that, make somebody successful, but I would say start with mindset. Don't start with the end in mind. Don't start with the rewards. have the mindset that every single part of this journey,
Mm.
I'm going to enjoy it.
Mm.
I'm going to enjoy the challenge when things are bad
Yeah.
and, we're arguing. We just lost a big customer, right?
Mm.
Or this came out of nowhere and now this is the big problem that we have to tackle.
Yeah.
Um, don't worry about all that. But also when you have like successes, definitely celebrate small wins. I'm not saying don't celebrate at all, but don't fool yourself into believing that just because you had this one win today and you got a major client, it's going to keep happening.
Mm.
So enjoy the journey. And the journey is really, I'm going to wake up with this goal in mind and I'm going to go after it. And I'm going to go after my goals and I'm going to go after my dreams. And that's
Mm.
it. If you have that mindset, I feel like no matter what ups and downs happens in between, you have a much stronger chance of succeeding than
Mm.
someone who doesn't have that mindset. Because
Mm.
for that person, and I know this is a really long answer, but
No,
for
that's
that
good.
person, as soon as they have an obstacle, if they weren't in it for the journey, they're going to question their decision.
Yeah.
Oh, did I make the right decision? Should
Yeah.
I quit? This is not really giving me the happiness I want today.
Mm.
Should I go and do something else? Should I pivot? Like, then you're going to have all these question marks because you weren't in it for the journey,
Mm.
right? You were in it for that shiny object at the end, and you
Mm.
didn't get that as fast as you wanted to get it. So now you
Mm.
rather give up than keep going.
Mm.
So for me, I feel like having that sort of that, and that allows me to allow that perseverance because so many setbacks,
Mm.
a ton from 20s up until now, just years and years of setbacks. But like I said earlier, like
Mm.
you only fail like if you quit. So just don't quit.
Yes.
Just keep going.
Mm. That's a great piece of advice. And I think, for me personally, the biggest takeaway here is tie your why should be important, right? Like tie your why as much as you can to your goal, because through that, no matter because if you choose the car, the shiny object, or, this materialistic thing and you achieve it, now what, right? And even if just, have that why as well, I think is for me really what I took away.
Yeah, and then a lot of times, I have friends that once they achieve it, they're not happy.
Mm.
They're more miserable, but
Yeah.
they got everything that they wanted to get.
That's crazy.
And
That's crazy.
and why is that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why is it that after all these sacrifices, after all the risks you took, and now you're wealthy, you have freedom, you have everything. Why are you so miserable,
Mm.
right? And
Mm.
to me, the answer is because now you're like comparing yourself to other people,
Mm.
and you're not really appreciating where you came from.
Mm.
Where you started to where you are now.
Mm.
Now you're with another crowd of people that might be better off than you are.
Yeah.
And it's like you're not happy because you're seeing these other things, but you have no idea where they started, how they
Mm.
got there, right? Same thing with social
Mm.
media. Like you only see the highlight reel. You don't see
Mm-hmm.
the bad parts of someone's life. So you
Yeah.
just think everything is perfect. So I think that's like one of the reasons that it's like there's a lot of like even depression when people sell their businesses.
Mm.
They don't know what to do with their time. They don't know what to do with their money. And it's because like a lot of them have that same work ethic where they like the journey more than the actual
Mm.
destination,
Mm.
right? So for people in their 20s, I would say don't overvalue the destination.
Mm.
Don't give that so much value. It's really
Mm.
not as great as it seems, and I mean you kind of realize that with age.
Mm.
But get started, get going, and just go for it.
That's awesome, man. Ronak, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure talking with you. And yeah, thank you,
Yeah,
man.
Darren, appreciate it. It was great to be on. Thank you.
Stop.